Great. Well, thank you. Again, my name is Paul Freeman. I'm on the board with the Friends of Shades Creek, and we appreciate and we're thrilled to have Dr. Bill Deutsch as our speaker tonight. Um, Bill is a native of Rochester, New York, and grew up getting wet in Lake Ontario, the Finger Lakes, and Genesee River. He's got a bachelor's degree in zoology and anthropology, a master's degree in biology, and a PhD in aquatic ecology and fisheries. He worked for about 11 years as an aquatic biologist for a consulting company on the Susquehanna River in Pennsylvania, which is the Susquehanna is really an awesome stream river up there. He moved with his wife and four daughters to Auburn to work on his doctorate in 1985. And Bill affectionately says he became a damn Yankee at that time by not leaving Alabama for the worked for 26 years at the Auburn School of Fisheries, Aquaculture, and Aquatic Sciences, and retired as a research fellow emeritus in 2013. In his retirement, he's enjoyed a little bit of time, but he's also penned two books and certainly enjoys talking about them and their topics about Alabama's amazing natural history. His talk tonight is going to be titled Links Between Alabama's Rocks and Rivers, an overview of two books. And Dr. Bill Deutsch, I'm going to turn this over to you and Katie, and you'll get you to share your screen. I remind everybody, if you can, to mute your link while Bill's speaking, and at the end, we'll open it up to some questions, which we can take either through the chat room or vocally. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks a lot, Paul. And I want to make sure everybody can hear me and see the screen okay. Okay, very good. Well, as we were talking before we started the meeting, April's unusually busy for all of us in the environmental community. We got so many things going because it is Earth Month after all. So I had to pop up a picture in the top center here of my first Earth Day pin, 1970. I was undergrad taking my first college level ecology course. So how cool is that? To have the first Earth Day in the middle of that. And so it's always fun for me to think about 53 years later. I always try to do some special thing about raising awareness of our environment in April around Earth Day. So I'm very pleased to be here with y'all and to do that through these two books that I've worked on in the last 5 years or so. Okay, so having just a little glitch here on advancing these. There we go. Sorry. Now it did it all at once. So just before I jump into these, to the overview of these books, I wanted to just say how appreciative I was to get invited and attend the Salamander Festival. I think many of you were there, but I heard a tally of about 800 people showed up at Homewood High School Auditorium. Just a phenomenal event. And so this is from the table that I was on next to the Cahaba River Society. And I'm glad Vicki joined us because she was Miss Salamander, or whatever her title was, walked around spreading goodwill, dressed as a spotted salamander and helped paint the kids up and all that. So it was just a really neat event. And to my right, Will with the Cahaba River Society, talking to all these kids. That little guy with the cowlick really cracked me up with the alligator snapping turtle shell. And of course, Jim Brown showing his salamanders, which just really enthralled the kids. David's daughter on the right, and just a lot of kids went through, and it just was a really cool time. And briefly, just 2 days ago, last Tuesday, John Jacobson, a buddy of mine there in the black with the net, teaches ecology labs at Auburn, and he and I led our Ollie group, our retirees, on a night hike in the Tuskegee National Forest last Tuesday, and we started flipping logs. We got so inspired by that salamander festival, started looking for them. This was a floodplain that had been burned over by the Forest Service and Nature Conservancy, and also was under waist deep water, shortly thereafter. So it had a lot of stressors, you might say. But nevertheless, we found a lot of good critters. We were in the water and found a not too friendly water moccasin there. But basically about a dozen marbled salamanders and some nice slimy salamanders. And I put this up to see if you can see the critter in that picture, but it is a Fowler's toad. They were singing. And we also heard birdsong frog, banjo frog, yellow-throated warbler, barred owl, coyote, and various rednecks out in the woods there that night. So very, very wonderful time seeing retirees get all giddy, acting like little school kids out there, but it was worth it. So I think many of you are familiar with the Alabama Rivers book. I won't spend a lot of time on it, but since the talk is a link between rocks and rivers, I wanted to mention it. It came out in 2018, and it was timed to coincide with our bicentennial. That was December of 2019. And one of the reasons was the Bicentennial Commission had made a statement that this was a time to look back on our history, but really to use that to look forward. And it really stuck with me. We are stepping into our third century. What do we want to be? What do we want Alabama to be? And just as a mental exercise, if you think, well, what comes to mind when you say 1819 to 1919? And then what comes to mind 1919 to 2019? And then what comes to mind from 2019 on? So we have just crossed this threshold. And what will we be? Who will we be? And I made a statement in the preface that it's impossible really to consider Alabama's history and future without a strong consideration of our rivers, because they've played such a vital role in who we are. So that book is divided into 3 parts. These wonderful part spreads, by the way, are images provided by Hunter Nichols, who many of you know. He lives in Birmingham at least part of the time, rest of the time in Philadelphia, but a really accomplished river photographer and videographer. But part 1 talks more, in general about rivers that would be worldwide, but in particular Alabama, in terms of hydrology and geology and biodiversity and so on in a general sense. And then it moves into part 2, which breaks down each of these major river basins. I use 10 and bring out the idea that a river is a lot like us. It has a unique personality, which is driven by nature and nurture. So the nature part, rainfall, geology, rocks, topography, temperature, those kinds of things. And then nurture, obviously, what we do to our rivers for good and bad. And as a result, many of you are river rats. You spend a lot of time on the water. You know that they're unique, and each one, has these wonderful features or, unfortunate assaults by human activities, and that's why we're all in the game. Part 3 is the challenge. So the first parts really were the celebration, and within the challenge, I tried something a little different. It was very challenging for me. It was a chapter called Personalizing Your River Ethic. And it initially sounded kind of strange, like what in the world are you talking about? But what I tried to do is draw from the first 2 parts and put out 7 celebrations to consider that would help anybody, whether they're familiar with rivers or not, to form an ethic, a code of belief or how they should be treated, what they might do activity-wise. And so I'll just go through these 7 celebrations, which kind of are drawn from each of the rivers. And the first is that Alabama rivers are such a vital part of our history and culture, starting with our state seal, the only state that features rivers in a very simple river map. And there's a very cool story behind that. But, upper left, the Clovis Point, the fact that 95% of human history in Alabama is indigenous peoples, Native Americans, before any colonization or movement, into our land from Europe or Africa or other parts. And just honoring that and realizing, how rivers are so intertwined in our history and culture. The second celebration is how Alabama rivers are ancient and physically diverse. And we'll return to that in the second book here. But, I kept hearing stories from Jim Lacefield and others, that some of our rivers, in particular, the Cahaba and the Black Warrior, are ranked as some of the oldest rivers in the world. And I thought, wow, what does that mean? How do geologists get into all this? So I try to pick that apart a little bit. But just the fact that we are, privileged to live in and float on waters that are so diverse and ancient. That, of course, leads to the third celebration, that Alabama rivers are full of life. I think we're all familiar with how we rank in aquatic biodiversity very highly. We have world-class biodiversity and rank first in the nation in a number of critters, fish and crayfish and snails and turtles and all kinds of things. And of course, that's an outgrowth of that physical diversity. It's kind of a corollary, that biodiversity derives from a diverse physical environment. Then we move on. Alabama rivers are key to our economy. And, whether it's from Native American canoes to the flatboat era, the steamboat era, the hydropower era, our current era of recreation, and what Vicki and I were on a webinar earlier today, pump storage facilities being proposed, to come into our state as part of the mix. So water is still there at the core of our economy. We're seeing a lot of business and industry being drawn to our state because of our abundant water supply. So it becomes very paramount to watch that and do it, in the wisest way we can muster. Another celebration that our rivers provide vital ecological services. We would be paying probably trillions of dollars to service and purify our water, kill pathogens and denature other toxins and so on. And the biological services that come in, the attraction to wildlife and fisheries and all kinds of beautiful things that we can appreciate in our state. Then again, Alabama rivers are beautiful, mysterious, and spiritually enriching. So I just put in a picture of Beth Finch there and a poem by Jeannie Thompson, which neither knew the other existed, but to me, they fit perfectly. Now the singing of the river is his. He has opened his eyes, and each tree in its green integrity bows as he moves past. So I let the poets do their things. I don't say, well, those are trees that are caving in with bank erosion from too much stormwater runoff, because that kind of spoils the poem, but anyways, we scientist type have to back off sometimes and just glory in the poetry and the beauty of the place. And I really think that's an important part of our celebration. And then finally, the seventh is Alabama rivers are vulnerable and they need our care. Water supply is not infinite. We can damage things almost irreversibly. We can bring species into extinction, which is forever, and so on and so forth. So being aware of that and playing a part in the care or restoration, protection, conservation, again, is a privilege. So I hope that from one of those 7 or more, maybe all 7, that we each can fortify, let's say, our river ethic and know why and how we're doing what we're doing, and just supporting each other and doing a better job of it. So that's pretty much, what I wanted to say on the Rivers book. We can loop back in the Q&A if you'd like, but I've been real happy. At least before COVID, I hit the road. I was invited to various book talks and top 60 different talks around the state, and met a lot of really great people and great conversations and so on. And it's now just picking up a little bit again after COVID. And but after I got out of therapy from writing the first book, just kidding, I enjoyed it, but it does take a toll on you, as you might imagine. But I also, in as you might imagine, in what I've just said about the Rivers book, I just kept thinking about this deep time connection to rivers in particular, but the environment in general. And some of you know from Water Rally held at Camp Beckwith not too long ago that I did a cosmic walk, which kind of puts things into perspective from the Big Bang, the real deep time, the 14.6 billion year old history of the universe, and taking it around the rope and so on, to actually humble and awe us in how, what a tiny part of the whole timeline we occupy. And so that, plus being retired and getting heavily involved in the Alabama Paleontological Society and going on these great field trips and realizing, that Alabama is a pretty amazing state fossil-wise. So I jumped in on that project, and I just, in general, I tried to make a book that has a very reduced ecological footprint, because I learned when you go with the larger publishing houses and university presses, a lot of these books, can come with a pretty high ecological footprint, that is printed in Asia and transported around the world, and just, much more heavy duty impacts than you would imagine. I'm proud to say that this book had a publisher, an artist, a layout person, a Photoshop person, and an author that lived within 200 miles of each other. And it's kind of an Alabama born and bred book. So I have to put that out there. And it let it be a work of art with this wonderful colleague of mine who helped design the covers and do some other things. But the key part of this was, and I've been told this by the readers so far, it came out in October, but these 50 some bio sketches, which I'll touch on momentarily, I interviewed these 50 folks, some professional and some avocational, hobbyists, if you will, enthusiasts, and got these amazing stories of how and why they got involved in fossils and paleontology, and who were their mentors, and where were their turning points in their lives, and so on. And it really drives the book, I think. At least that's what I've been told by the readership so far. And I also, in the surveys, asked these folks, okay, give me your best find, your best fossil story. So I have these joy of the hunt sections, which have that wonderful serendipity of how people found these amazing things. And I'd also like to acknowledge the sponsors. The Alabama Paleontological Society helped muster the troops, to contribute if they so chose, to help with defray the publication costs, because we didn't go with the big house, publishing, where that's done a different way. But the museums, both in Tuscaloosa and Auburn, also generously contributed. And so just jumping in, I know Carl knows this. He's been a fossil hunter for decades, but some of you others might not know how special our state really is, because we hear about our modern biodiversity being so high, especially our aquatic biodiversity, but Alabama is also the highest fossil diversity in the eastern United States and really rivals much of the country. In our state, people just say, no way, we have dinosaurs, 5 different kinds, in fact, mosasaurs, these extinct dinosaur-like reptiles, plesiosaurs, flying reptiles, pterosaurs. One of our colleagues found a piece of a 7-foot millipede, dragonflies with 2 and 3 foot wingspans, all kinds of other invertebrates. Our whales had little legs. We have rhinoceros, we have mastodons, camels. June Ebersole at McWane is putting out a tome which is describing 400 kinds of sharks and bony fishes, many extinct, of course, but putting Alabama first in that category. All kinds of plants, 50-foot tall horsetails, scale trees, on and on. So fundamentally, it's a 500 million year fossil record that is found here and there on the surface of Alabama. So it's not like, you have to take deep cores or whatever, although some have found fossils even, at more than a mile deep in some of the cores drilled by the oil and gas folks. But these are on our surface. And so I break that book down into 4 parts. And the first is just called The Fossils and the Finders, which, of course, lays out the fact that Alabama is so special, and that what was new and really fascinating to me was that humans, even pre-humans, when I say that, it's believed pre-Homo sapien humans, found and revered fossils. There's 300,000-year-old hand axes with fossil urchins preserved on their surface, really thought to carry some importance, maybe power or good luck in hunting or whatever. But the Egyptians had extinct bones in their pyramids, and the Greeks, put mastodon skulls in their temples and made measurements and so on. I mean, it's been around for a long time, but so-called scientific paleontology really came in just as Alabama was entering statehood. It was really a early 1800s kind of thing. And Alabama really became a magnet for specialists from around the world, because as unfortunate Indian removal or Native Americans were, forced to leave, and farms were cleared, land, was cleared, bridges and fields and all of that, these fossils began to surface. And so this part gets into that, and all the amazing people that started to look for them. Why do we have so many? Well, this regional map is pointing out, if we look at our neighboring states, and just without getting into any of the details of the key, just colors and variety, you can see Alabama has such an amazing mix of colors, in particular that green band that we call the black belt on the surface, that band that arcs through our state. And those colors all correspond to the 3 major geological eras. You see the map on the right. So north of our fall line, the northern part of our state, especially northeast, is the Paleozoic era. That's the older, sometimes crystalline rock, although there's a lot of limestone. In fact, APS has a field trip there this Saturday to the Lacan Quarry around Coleman. But then that green zone and a little bit of the dark tan is the Mesozoic era, and finally toward our coast is the Cenozoic era. So we have all 3 geological eras on our surface, which is rather unique for a state. And just to even maybe simplify it, the Paleozoic you can think of as before the dinosaurs. So from the advent of multicellular life about 540 million years ago, we have the Paleozoic era. Before dinosaurs, the Mesozoic is that 252 to 66 million year ago, where all those mosasaurs and rare but occasional dinosaurs show up, along with a lot of other extinct Mesozoic critters. And then finally, after the dinosaurs. So there's a line there between the Mesozoic and Cenozoic they call the KT boundary, and it's apparent in Alabama. Amazingly, the Chicxulub meteor hit and evidence of that, and then having all these amazing mammals in the southern part of our state. So if we look at, since it was called the fossils and the finders, there's just a whole array of amazing people who were out there as pioneers, not the least of which the last person on the right, Eugene Allen Smith, who was our state geologist for about 53 years. Smith Hall on University of Alabama's campus is named for him. And who finds these fossils today? Well, we have a lot of professionals like James Lamb, the late Brian Axsmith from University of South Alabama, David King at Auburn, who's been studying dinosaurs so much he's starting to look like one. June Ebersol, some of you know from the McWane Science Center. Andy Rinsberg at University of West Alabama. Adiel Klumpmacher, our state paleontologist at the Alabama Museum of Natural History. So these folks and others are the professionals that are still very active in looking, but then we have this whole array of these avocational, like Dr. Ron Buda, our very own Carl Sloan in our audience tonight, Jim Lacefield, who many of you know, and Prescott Atkinson, who's the vice president of the APS now and has been looking for fossils for over 50 years. Ashley Allen, long-term APS president, and Jim Braswell, current APS president. But fortunately, so far it's been old white guys. The face of paleontology in Alabama is changing. Man Liu is doing some pretty neat things with Ike, Takahito Ikejiri at the museum. And Chelsea Commons just gave a nice webinar for APS for her doctoral work with the sharks. Leah Travis Taylor did some amazing work for her graduate work with mosasaur teeth enamel. And Leticia DeMarcia, a Brazilian woman at Auburn, who started a paleo club for our students there at Auburn. So we've got some great folks. Part two, moving away from fossils and finders, just a quick walk through deep time, things I alluded to a little bit earlier. But that Paleozoic era, again, the light blue in the northern part of the state, it has many periods. We even have some Cambrian, the first period of the Paleozoic era that multicellular life appeared. But one of our real claims to fame is the Coal Age, especially in Tuscaloosa, Jefferson, and Walker counties, where these amazing coal swamps, pre-Gulf of Mexico, 300 million year old swamps, and the fossils that are from them, not the least of which are just these amazing trackways, which Ron Buda and others, David Kopaska Merkel, have put the book out, Footprints in Stone, and just the invertebrate, like the horseshoe crab type scooting trackway on the left, or the tetrapod, the little lizard or amphibian-like critter that ran across that mud flat. And there's just hundreds of these have been uncovered from the Stephen C. Minkin Paleontological Footprint Site, which we call Union Chapel Mine Site, or the Minkin Site in Walker County. If we move to that purple band, the middle, we have instead of calling it the Mesozoic era, which for the non-specialist kind of is a snoozer, I call it life in the ages of dinosaurs, mosasaurs, and flowers, because these all had their advent then. But we do have a dinosaur, theropod dinosaur on the right there at McWane, which was found near Montgomery and so named, Appalachiosaurus montgomeryensis. So that's our claim to fame, big meat-eating dinosaur that showed up. And Prescott, when he was 19, I believe, maybe a little younger, he found the one and only dinosaur egg. It's there in the plexiglass cube, thought to be of an ornithomimid type dinosaur, which is big bird with teeth there. You see him pictured. And that's recently been displayed for public viewing at the Auburn University Life Sciences building. So if you're ever on campus, you can see that with a touch screen and all the scans they did, tens of thousands of scans revealing an embryonic bones of a little dinosaur in the egg. Pretty amazing stuff. Okay, then we moved to the south part of the state, the Cenozoic. Instead of calling it Cenozoic, life in the ages of mammals, grasses, and ice, because grasses first emerged. This is some of the work of Brian Axsmith, who unfortunately was an early victim of COVID. But you can see the 5-needle white pine that he found, revealing that Alabama's climate at that time, about let's say 15,000 years ago, was boreal. It looked a lot like northern Canada. Of course, there were glaciers, a little bit to our north, which gave us that climate, but mastodons and sloth and dire wolves and bison, other critters, roamed Alabama. Some of the plants that we would recognize today were here, and some that aren't here anymore, maybe found in Asia today, are being revealed along our coastal bluffs and so on. So it's just amazing what fossils can reveal. This is our state fossil. It's a Eocene epic whale, about a 40 million year old whale. The replica here hangs in the ceiling of our Alabama Museum of Natural History. It had small hind legs, vestigial hind legs. And we have other whales. In fact, I found one on the Alabama River about 6 or 7 years ago, a cousin called Cynthia Cetus. But it's just, again, kind of mind-boggling that these creatures were here in our land. Part 3 is I called from discovery to impact because there's just such an amazing amount of work, good work by specialists and people that have tremendous skills and time to take a fossil, which might not look like much, like the crab on the left. Believe me, when that was first found, it was just a blob of a rock. I mean, it had the faint outline of a crab claw, but a friend of mine who's a preparator used an air scribe and revealed that inside of a nodule, right down to the cuticle of that crab, a 80 million year old crab, just laying in the riverbank out in Lowndes County, Dallas County. That's where we like to go fossil hunting a lot, he and I. But beyond that, even when you get such a beautiful specimen, it needs to be identified, it needs to be curated, it needs to be displayed, it needs an educator to help the public engage that and say, why does it matter? What does it mean? What could it do for me? So there's just an amazing amount of great work going on in that regard. And then the fourth part, why fossils matter. And this one, kind of waxes philosophical a bit, but at least on the nuts and bolts, it can help us with our school curricula, with our museum displays, with our outreach programs, with public policy. Believe it or not, it has direct ties to natural resource management. And I'm currently serving on a task force to revamp the K through 12 science course of study for Alabama. And with about 40 other teachers, we're going at it 2 days a month for the year. It's a daunting task, but I keep asking myself, how much do our kids know or need to know about these wonderful deep time stories and how relevant it is? It seems like maybe to some, totally irrelevant, but I think I could make a case it's quite important. So just to wrap it up then, the title was The Links Between the Rocks and Rivers. We can start with a basic one, that rocks, or the topographic features they generate, determine the river courses. I think that's pretty fundamental. You may be well aware of that a ridge line, for example, will define a watershed boundary, like the diagram on the left, and how that in turn has defined our major river basins that you see here on the right. And to that end, we in Alabama Water Watch have developed a teacher's guide, an educator guide to Alabama rivers, where I use a towel. We have an exercise for teachers called towel tectonics and topography, which basically means scrunch this tea towel you get at Walmart and make the Appalachian Mountains, and then use yarn to define our rivers. And you can you knock yourself out with all kinds of props like cotton and peanuts and fossils and all kinds of things. And we've had a blast doing that. But since you're from the Friends of Shades Creek here, I thought I'd go on to one we do that's a lot of fun, and you might want to try it. I laid my hand there on this towel, and this is representing the valley and ridge of the Southern Appalachians. I got this from James Lowry. He got it from Mike Dobbins, and I just animated it. But I'll tell you what, the next time the conversation lags at the dinner party, just slap your right hand on the table and go to town here, because the thumb, as you drive up 280 from my neck of the woods across Birmingham through Jefferson County, you'll cross Oak Mountain and drop into the Cahaba River Valley. You then rise over Shades Mountain into Shades Creek, and then you cross the Big Kahuna Red Mountain, and you're into Village and Valley Creeks. Go over Cemetery Ridge, you're at 5 Mile Creek, and take the next ridge over by Tarrant, and you're in Turkey Creek. So just with your hand, you can have fun with your friends. And it's just pointing out that Red Mountain, which you might call the gesture finger, is the basin divide between the Cahaba and the Black Warrior. So now you got it. You can get the write-up from James, but we've had fun with that, how it relates to our topography. And I've been going into some schools, this one in Montgomery. And when you ask a kid who wants to be Africa, they get to jam the towel and put up all the ridges to make the Appalachians when Pangea, the supercontinent, was first formed. You get a lot of hands raised to do that. So anyways, I hope we're educating a lot of kids on that point. The second, not only the courses, but their physical and chemical characteristics. So that's, again, pretty basic, but amazingly, we need to keep educating people about that. You can see on the satellite image on the left that a lot of our rivers, including the Cahaba, when it crosses the fall line, it gets notably slower, more sluggish, more meandering. The sediment changes to a softer bottom. So the biota dramatically changes relative, say, to that rocky image of a North Alabama stream. So not only its physical characteristics like turbulence and oxygen from a waterfall or a rapid, a shoal, to the chemical characteristics of the nature of the minerals and other chemicals coming off the rocks as they interface with the water. So those two things, the courses and the physical chemical characteristics, will then of course drive the biota. And that biota has been around for a long time. That's the point. 500 million years of fossil record here. And so freshwater, marine, and terrestrial fossils are typically found in river gravel because it's the rivers that have carved into the land and exposed those layers. One of my favorites on the right there is a tooth. It's a molar of a tapir who lived in Alabama about 12,000 years ago. Now they're only in Central and South America, and there's a couple over in Asia, but they used to roam around here, and I've got five molars to prove it. Quite an exciting find. So, and then lastly, the link between our rocks and rivers, and this is just hitting me more and more, is how our aquatic biodiversity has these deep time roots. And I think about darters. I used to work on darters on the Susquehanna River. And, I think they have, I don't know, 3 or 4 darters up there. And down here, we got about 80 darters, I think we have 25 just in the one genus of Ethiostoma you see pictured here. And the geologists tell us that, our rivers, like the Upper Cahaba, Black Warrior, were rejuvenated, some 10 to 15 million years ago with an uplift. And it took an old river and kind of a homogeneous population of these little fish and isolated them into pockets with waterfalls and other features that made the rivers young again, if you will. And as a result, that deep time and isolation gave us that speciation that we're just really blessed to have. And the state amphibian there in the lower right, the Red Hills salamander, when they did the genetic tests on that little critter, they now realize he branched off the family tree of salamanders in the Oligocene about 30 million years ago. So he's been living underground, happy as a clam, just doing his thing. But wow, what a symbol of our deep time connection of our biodiversity. So I'll just wrap it up with these slides. I took my OLLI group. I teach an Ancient Life in Alabama course, and I took them to our museum to see the egg. And then we went back in, and John Armbruster's there in the blue shirt, who was the director of the museum. And he took us back into the museum where I volunteered, and he held up a mastodon molar, that big old elephant. And the name mastodon means breast tooth, mastos and don. And it's because the Frenchman, Georges Cuvier, thought the cusp of the tooth reminded him of a woman's breasts. And I tell my class, well, of course he was French, so the doorstop would have reminded him of a woman's breast, but nevertheless, that elephant got named breast tooth or mastodon. And when we held it up, I stood behind him because I just wanted to get my students' impressions. And I just said, may we all cultivate our gleeful, jaw-dropping, hand-wringing awe and wonder of Alabama's rocks and rivers. And I got all 3 ladies to do those expressions there just spontaneously. And so that's it. Thank you again for the invite. And there's the link to it. I think Katie put it in the chat, and there's I'm uptown like at the movies here. I even got me my own QR code now. So be glad to talk with you more about it. And, thank you. We'll just open it up.
Bill, thank you very much on behalf of Friends of Sage Creek and all those that got to enjoy your talk tonight. Thank you very much. Bill's one of the first people I met. I moved to Alabama 20 years ago and had the pleasure of meeting Bill through some of the aquatic functions. And he really, as you can tell, he does a great job of taking science and distilling it down so that the lay people can understand it. He's a great communicator, and that's a great skill to have as someone who can speak to all folks and help them relate to some of the wonders here in Alabama. We are open for some questions. We appreciate it, and we have a small enough group. If anybody wants to either wave their hand or raise their hand, I'll call on you, or just go ahead and just chime in with some questions.
Question. This is Mary Ann in Hoover, and that is, could you give us a notion of how a paleontologist goes about finding, let's say, the mastodon tooth, and maybe just thing, but then goes, I think is able to expand the understanding of that to an entire creature.
Okay, I'm gonna need just a little help. I didn't quite hear that from my end. If
I
someone
th-
could repeat that question, please.
I think the gist was, how does a paleontologist take one item, one small bone, one small fraction of an animal, and
Yep.
extrapolate to know as much as we know about
Okay,
that
very
animal?
good. Yes.
I think that was the question.
Okay,
Yes,
very
thank you.
good. Yes, and in fact, I point out in a chapter on that, From Discovery to Impact, that there's two major misconceptions that the public has. And one is that these complete dinosaur skeletons just fall out of the hillside and all you have to do is pick them up and stick them in the museum. It's very rare to have a complete organism, like that. They do occasionally happen, but it's quite rare. So the other misconception is that some tiny little chip of bone is used to describe a whole new group of organisms and basically flying from the seat of your pants. And I'm saying, there's elements of truth in both, but the discovery to impact part of that, I was able to learn a lot and drill into that there's just an amazing amount of technology and good science that allows people to gain a tremendous amount of scientific information from fragments. I guess the simplest answer to the question, I think I heard a reference to the mastodon tooth, is that, there'll be another part of the world where a near complete mastodon is found, with that identical tooth. And so you start to make those inferences across and piece together a complete organism from maybe fragments found here, 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 here. But I did show one picture. I'll give you one quick example. Leah Travis Taylor, the young woman that was at the microscope with the jaw of a mosasaur. She's a student of Becky Toten there at University of Alabama, professor in paleontology. And just again, because of this relatively new technology, she was able to drill into the enamel of a few teeth and use isotopes to indicate that those mosasaurs migrated from marine to fresh water to drink and to regulate osmotically. And amazingly, that is exactly what their nearest relatives living today do, which are sea snakes. They live in the marine environment, but make these forays up into fresh water on about every 2-week schedule. And Leah, with good science, just measured the isotopes, heavy and light oxygen, and graphed out and saw that same periodicity, which indicates that animal moves. So not only are we getting its structure or morphology, but we're getting its behavior, which is just incredible stuff. And I know, everybody should be skeptical. All scientists are skeptics by nature, but it's just really been demonstrated through good science that, not every fragment, some are just unidentifiable. You just throw your hands up or you say, well, it's mammal, but that's all I know. But other times, even from a relatively small fossil, you can derive a tremendous amount of information.
Thank you. Another question? Oh,
Bill,
I believe somebody,
yeah,
you might need to unmute yourself. Henry, did you have a question?
yeah, is Lyle trying to speak, I believe.
There we go.
Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, Bill, excellent lecture, and kind of a quick question. How do we share more broadly the excellent message that you give on the biodiversity of Alabama, to a broader audience? Because I've lived in several states throughout the U.S., and Alabama has a very, very unique biodiversity. How do we more broadly share, your message? I'd be interested in your thoughts.
Thank you, Lyle. Yeah, I mean, I think some of us, if we added up the number of years, even people on this Zoom have been trying to answer that question, I'm confident we'd cross the centennial mark easily. And I don't mean to sound trite or whatever, but I think we do it like Katie's Bio Blitz this Saturday, I think we do it one child at a time, one person at a time, letting them experience that awe, like those three ladies, that picture I really love because none of them were specialists and they knew relatively little about Alabama's natural history. In fact, many of our retirees are moving into Alabama from other states, and they just can't believe the treasures we have, and I think whether it's a child or an adult, many of us are committed to, spreading that message one-on-one, or in my case, I tried to jump in and do it through a couple of books. There's, Doug Phillips has been doing it with Discovering Alabama for decades now, and we're all just in the trenches, so to speak. And it's just a wonderful thing to see a person's light bulb go on, to really to bring them on. And just being at Water Rally a couple of weeks ago, you could just feel the energy in the room. Like we left, energized to keep going in spite of some big hurdles. I referred to this task force I'm on about the K through 12 science curriculum. And, I'm not to divulge any of our deliberations, but I will say that many of these teachers are weary. I mean, they're inspired and they love these kids, but sometimes it's the school administration or state politics or something else, and it's just, or societal change, and they're just worn down. You throw COVID on that, and I was told our last meeting we'll have a 1 million teacher shortage in the United States, and it's unfortunately predicted there's going to be a mass exodus in retirements in the next few years in Alabama. There'll be a crying need for educators. And so we're working on this science curriculum, and related to your question, Lyle, about communicating the treasures we have in Alabama and the importance of protecting and being in the third century of our state and doing so responsibly and all. And, I'm just listening and learning in this committee, but I'm so inspired by teachers that have been trying for 10, 20, 30 years to do this kind of stuff. And others are frankly beat up and they're ready. They're counting the days till they can get out. And we know nationwide, and especially here in the South, some of the politics get so crazy, and I say in Ancient Life, when you get the deep time story of life on Earth, when it sinks in, it will affect your outlook. It will affect your river ethic, and it should affect public policy, biodiversity conservation, land use, low impact development. It should affect every aspect. But unfortunately, there are some that are oblivious, and the question is, will we prevail, or will some of these things, disappear forever? So it is a big challenge. I could say more, and I'm sure you could say more. All of us could say more, but I'm doing it through public speaking, a couple books, and just lots of one-on-one engagement.
Well, thanks for all that you're doing, and keep up the nice work. These are excellent books, and greatly appreciated. Thanks, Bill.
Appreciate it, Lyle. Thank you.
Bill, for those of us who were not able to make Water Rally this year, Could you just encapsulate your presentation, beginning with the Big Bang and what you did with that, and what your audience was and how it was received, and what's the message that you want to carry forward with that demonstration?
Yes, I will. Better yet, we'll do it sometime, especially under an open sky with lots of stars. So here's the gist of it, and it's something that's simple and anyone could do. I was introduced to it, by the way, by Eleanor Delbane about 20 some years ago. And I just had a real nice conversation with Eleanor today. She called me, tell me all about it. What happened? How'd it go? You know? And so here's the deal. You get a rope 146 feet long, and that represents 14.6 billion years since the Big Bang. So each foot of the rope is 100 million years, you know, so right away you're off into these mind-boggling concepts. But because there were 80 people attending water rally, I spiraled the rope. So you spiral it like the ammonite in the QR code there on the last slide. You spiral it out, and I knew there were about 80. So I made the rope about 20 to 30 feet diameter at the last big loop. Okay. So then I used little LED candles, and it can be, you can do it with real candles, but we were looking for rain and wind and all that. So I use these little LEDs, and I had pre-marked the rope for the events that I wanted to refer to. So the very beginning of the rope, the innermost end by the tightest coil right in the center, is the Big Bang. And I set a light there. And amazingly, you will walk 10 billion years from 14.6 to about 4.6 for the creation of the solar system. So you've gone around the rope 2/3 of the way just to get to the creation of our solar system. And so then I put another light at that point, of course. And what science now says is that there was free water in a relatively short time. The Earth's crust cooled, and water, the water cycle began, maybe at 4 billion or even maybe 4.4 billion years. So, just let's say 300-400 million years after the creation of the solar system, we had the water cycle. So I said, it's raining. There's no plants. There's no life. There's not even single-celled life, but there's rain and there's rivers. And to me, that was very profound. Meanwhile, by the way, while I'm doing this, we're playing spacey music, and I'm showing images of the James Webb Space Telescope that have just come back to Earth. And that telescope, by the way, will eventually, its goal is to take pictures of light that is more than 10 billion years old. It's already taking pictures of light that is hundreds of thousands of years old, which again, try figuring out what all that means at 186,000 miles a second. But okay, so then from there, just to make a long story short, I mark off the beginning of life and then the beginning of multicellular life. So when you get to that Cambrian era of the the Paleozoic era, the Cambrian period, the advent, the so-called Cambrian explosion of multicellular life, you are 5 feet from the end of the rope. You've walked over 140 feet of that rope. And at 5 feet from the end, you have multicellular life. The dinosaurs are 2 feet from the end of the rope. The pyramids are 1/16 of an inch from the end of the rope. And so you can kind of figure out where that puts you and me and all of our big world-shattering problems. So the bottom line is, we're looking at something that could make us feel so insignificant or so filled with wonder that we're here. As Eleanor says, human consciousness is the universe's way of understanding itself and knowing itself. So it gets pretty heady. That's why I kicked over from James Webb Space Telescope to Crosby, Stills and Nash Woodstock song. We are stardust. We are golden. We are billion-year-old carbon, and we've got to get back to the garden. So I closed with asking them, what Alabama River flows through your garden? And then we just cranked up the electric guitar music. That's why I say we all do it a little differently.
Great. Hey, Bill, Katie put a link in the in our chat, but I was just going to ask folks, if folks wanted to get a copy of one or both of your books, what's the easiest way for them to go about that?
Okay, the slide I hope is showing now has the website. It's called alabamarocksandrivers.com. And I tested it, if you have your phone, you could take a picture of that QR code and it'll pop up the website. But the website is more than that. It has a way to custom order the books, to have them custom signed if they would like, give them as gifts or whatever, and also to schedule book talks. And it has other things, and it will have more. It'll have some videos and some things like that. It has a calendar of events, because I do different talks of different topics around the state. I have one Sunday about the history and prehistory of Alabama's state fossil, where I get into that whale a little bit. And then next month, I'm at the Etowah County Historical Society with more of a slant on the Rivers book. So you can see the calendar of events and things like that. But to answer your question, Paul, it's there, alabamarocksandrivers.com.
Thank you. Thank you.
And I only say that because if you do have a Rivers book, the website printed on the back now goes to a beauty supply company because some scoundrel stole it and wants hundreds of dollars for me to pay him to get it back. So I told him to take a hike. And I just tell my audience, you can really get some lovely mascara and lipstick, but you won't get any Rivers book if you go to that website. You have to go to alabamafoxandrivers.com.
And I can vouch for the speediness of book delivery when you order from Bill through the website.
Yeah, I popped one in the mail yesterday. My goal is to do same day delivery, and people sometimes have gotten the book the next day or the second day. The Postal Service does pretty well. Stamps.com works great. That's what I mean about a bioregional book. I sell them out of the back of my truck and I package them, bring them to the post office and all that kind of good stuff, which I like to do because you can get the custom sign with the way people want them to be signed.
Bill, I've got just a question. So it was surprising to me. I learned late in life, the word dinosaur is a relatively modern word. I guess mid 1800s was the first time we
Yes.
recognized dinosaurs as what they are.
Yes.
In your opinion, what in the heck were people thinking about fossils and that kind of stuff that they obviously were able to observe at some point? But but prior to that, what were people doing? And just can you talk about how quickly our understanding of paleontology and dinosaurs and fossils has advanced over the last 200 years?
That is such an important question, and it was mind-blowing to me. I had to do extensive reading on that, but I mentioned, there's a fellow who's British who wrote a book called The Star-Crossed Stone, and he's the one that pointed out that probably a Homo neanderthalensis or a Homo erectus, something pre-Homo sapien, found that fossil urchin and carefully carved around it to put it on a hand axe 300,000 years ago. And he finds Neolithic graves, and they're all over the UK of important people. One woman with a fetus, with a newborn rather, holding a baby. They were both buried. And the body was surrounded by about hundreds of urchins. So he traces the history of this fossil urchin, which people thought had magical powers. They had no idea what it was. But some, even way back, there were Persian philosophers, Chinese, and others who said these were once alive. But most people said, you're crazy. That is just a figured stone. The urchins were thought to be thunderstones. They fell out of heaven every time it thundered. They were used to cure sick cows. They were built into churches. If you go to the UK, you'll see fossil urchins in the walls of the church on one side, which were thought to ward off the devil. So they carried all these powers. But as you pointed out, it really was the early 1800s before people, what I call scientific paleontology, really kicked in. There was a kind of a pre-modern with the Greeks and Romans that made measurements and, surmise things. And you can imagine, they found, literally, they found a mastodon skull. If you see a mastodon like the one in the museum in Tuscaloosa, it has one large hole in the middle of about a 5-foot skull. So it's kind of easy to think, Cyclops really did come from that. If you were a pre-scientific person walking around and here's this skull full of, 4-inch teeth coming out of the hillside, no wonder there's a dragon myth. No wonder there's a Loch Ness monster, on and on and on. And a woman by the name of Adrienne Mayer is a folklorist at UCal. And she's written 2 books, one on Native Americans and their stories of sky monsters and sea monsters that sound amazingly like pterosaurs and mosasaurs. And she said, what we don't realize, what we moderns don't realize, is that fossils were very much a part of ancient people's daily lives. They were everywhere. And it inspired a lot of stories. So, and just taking it up to the present to see how recent it was, Thomas Jefferson, I put a quote in the book, he said it is utterly inconceivable that any animal would go extinct. He philosophically, as an enlightened, from the Scottish Enlightenment, he felt, that the prevailing philosophy was the great chain of being from the divine to the most inanimate object, and not one link could ever be broken. And when he sent Lewis and Clark out to the west to explore, he said, you find me a mastodon, because they were starting to show up, the fossils all over the East Coast. And he could not believe that it was extinct. He said, it's got to be out west. You make sure you find me one. So even as late as 1804, 05, many very smart people would not accept extinction. So once that dam broke, and that was a much bigger hurdle, by the way, than evolution. And people today wouldn't hardly imagine that. But philosophically, there had to be a lot of change before scientific paleontology really kicked in. And it's very recent. And that's, to me, that's one of the most important parts of the book, but others don't share that. Maybe you do, Paul.
Being respectful of everybody's time, I think it's getting close to 8:15, and some of us might have to enjoy our retirement tomorrow or get up and go to work, depending on or where we are in life. I'll leave you one last question, Bill, and recognize that folks can drop off at any time. I'm going to stick around, and Katie probably will stick around and hold this open for a few more minutes. But I just want to point on something. You touched on it a little bit, biodiversity, ecotourism, appreciation of an area's biodiversity and overall diversity is a great economic driver and a great awareness. We go to New Zealand or Costa Rica or Africa plains to study and visit and observe the local endemic flora and fauna. Alabama is host to probably more species of oak trees and more species of freshwater snails and more species of carnivorous plants or turtles, and that all this biodiversity. If you had one piece of big overarching advice for Alabama, how do we market Alabama more and better for our ecosystem and appreciation of what's here, so that folks from not only within our state appreciate it, but outside the state and the United States would appreciate and come to Alabama to explore our fossils and our flora and fauna.
Yeah. Well, another big question. And, you know, it's one of the most, to me, it's one of the most exciting things I've heard. That is an initiative I'll explain since I've been in Alabama, and I'm coming up on 40 years now. But I was up in the Paint Rock Reserve there with Bill Finch and spent a night at his house, in fact, and we talked into the wee hours. Bill is a dreamer and a great writer and a communicator. And he and a woman at the University of West Alabama, Dr. Jones, I think her first name is Carolyn, someone may know her, but she actually has started some years ago, and it's now gaining momentum, going to Washington. She was involved with the Obama administration. The door slammed shut following that, but is now reopening with the Biden administration. And it's the whole concept, which they have named seeing diversity through the eyes of diversity. And its wildest dreams, and these aren't all that wild, the Army Corps of Engineers and all their holdings, especially in that dinosaur era black belt, would relinquish their properties to the U.S. Park Service, and docents would come in at those campgrounds, and we would convert the Civil Rights Trail and our biodiversity, including our paleo biodiversity, and fold it into one concept. We now know there's buses coming in from all over the country and the world to, see the Montgomery to Selma March or the wonderful new museums in Montgomery. The people are coming here, and, can we build on that? Just like all of our groups, are now realizing that the environmental justice folks, the civil rights folks, and the tree hugger folks need to get together a lot more. And we're seeing it. We're seeing our boards transformed. We're seeing a lot of really cool things. And Bill said, Deutsch, you gotta step up on the paleo biodiversity element. I'm not the only one. There are so many that could do this. It's just, I couldn't let the story sit. I mean, there's people, of course, Jim Lacefield wrote a great book, and Jim was one of my reviewers and really helped me. But the story I'm trying to tell on the why it matters part, the part 4, is touching on these concepts. And what we really could do, and it doesn't just mean make your museum a better display. There is a lot there to get, that person engaged and informed, but to take it beyond, and this whole seeing diversity through the eyes of diversity, where the human history and then the prehistory are folded into one, that would include the careful protection of our living biodiversity. It's a very exciting thing. I haven't heard a whole lot of it since Bill and I talked, but I know that Dr. Jones has been going to DC, and I really am trying to keep my ear to the ground on that one. And I would jump in both feet if we could somehow pool our resources and our ideas and energy to help that along. Have you heard of that, Paul?
I actually have heard of it, and there's been some talks in the Cabaret Society had some speakers talk about that. I think recently at an annual meeting, talk about diversity and the connection there.
Yeah, pretty cool stuff.
Any last questions for Bill? We really do. Friends of Shades Creek appreciates your talk. This has been recorded. We're going to share it, make it available to others that just couldn't make it tonight. I thought it was very helpful and very informative. And you're always, as always, you're a great speaker, and we really appreciate your passion and your ability to connect the dots for everyone.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Anytime. Yep.
Thank you,
Very
Bill. It's great. Great
Okay.
presentation.
Thank you. Enjoyed the meeting. Well led, Paul.
Well, we look forward to seeing folks at cleanups and bio blitzes and around the state and around the rivers.
Very good. See y'all.